The humble playing card has had a large impact on life, society, and culture, but it took a long time to develop the modern 52-card deck. The general consensus among historians is that playing cards were invented in China, which invented paper and printing centuries before those innovations reached Europe. Early records suggest that cards made by using wooden blocks to press an image on paper were being used to play a game called Game of Leaves in China in the 9th century. It's not clear exactly how the invention made its way across the Asian continent to Europe, but early European records suggest a Saracens game, suggesting the use of playing cards came from the Middle East, possibly brought back to Europe by Crusaders. The playing of cards in Europe was immediately controversial, where laws were enacted to limit playing both as a disruption to work and as a moral failing. The earliest playing cards known to exist in Europe are dated to the 1300s, and the decks would have appeared unfamiliar to modern eyes. At first, the cards were individually hand-painted. The face cards were represented by a king, knight, and soldier. While suits had been invented when the cards were developed in China, the symbols used to represent the suits varied wildly by location. The French version, which became the most used in the Western world, had more recognizable symbols: hearts, tiles, clovers, and pikes. Germanic and Swiss cards used suits of hearts, bells, acorns, and leaves. Another card innovation introduced by the French was the use of queens instead of soldiers. So the face cards became king, queen, and knight. The queen was supposedly inspired by Joan of Arc, the youthful woman who, in 1429, led the French army against the English. German decks tended to exclude the queen, using an Obermann or upperman instead. The English have sometimes applied the English rule, where the queen and king switch order if the ruling monarch of England is a queen. Curiously, the French modeled their royal cards after actual people. Though it varied over time, the kings were generally thought to be the biblical King David for spades, the conquering Charlemagne for hearts, Julius or Augustus Caesar for diamonds, and Alexander the Great for clubs. The queens were Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, for the spades, Judith for hearts, who may have represented the wife of Charlemagne's son, Rachel, the biblical Jacob's favorite but infertile wife, for the queen of diamonds, and finally Argene for clubs, an anagram for Regina, whom some say represented Hera, the wife of Zeus, queen of the Greek gods. The idea that the ace might be a high card came to prominence in the 18th century when governments started placing a tax on the sales of playing cards. The ace was the card that was stamped to show the deck had been properly taxed. French card players brought the 52-card game of poke to the New World, where Americans changed the French word to poker. Americans appear to have added the innovation of placing an indication of the card number and suit on the corner of the card, thus allowing a player to hold and see their cards easily in one hand. That innovation was patented during the Civil War. This provoked a further change. When first letters of the royal face cards were printed on the corners, the K for king and the K-in for knave were too similar to be read easily in a smoky and poorly lit back room. So the knave was Americanized as a jack. The money accumulated during the game was now called a jackpot, because jacks or better were required in some games to start the action. For centuries, the backs of the cards was usually blank, but that would show fingerprints and wear, and you could start to identify the cards, and so card makers started producing elaborate designs on the back of their cards. And then they started rounding the corners so that those would not show wear or tear, and the paper was upgraded to be covered in plastic or wax, and that comes to the modern playing card deck that we tend to use today. If you enjoyed this History Guy short, then feel free to click that like button, subscribe to our channel, and check us out on Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and our merchandise on teespring.com.